Welcome to this Gcse Welsh Bacc student support screencast for the individual project. This video focuses on writing your research methods. The success criteria for the research methods is as follows. So if we're looking right at the top, starting with an obvious one, write in full clear sentences and use, and I guess this is where it changes slightly, a descriptive writing approach for your research methods. This simply means that you're going to be explaining in detail what you're doing, almost like a set of instructions. So let's say I was going to make a cup of tea and I had to explain to someone or describe to someone how to make a cup of tea. That is the approach I would have to take step by step. So it's more of a style approach. The second bullet point, or what you need to be doing to do well in your research methods, is to describe what primary and secondary research methods you are going to be using. Now, in the previous video on aims and objectives, we spoke a little bit about primary and secondary, but as a reminder, primary research is research that you will conduct yourself. So the vast majority, that would be creating a questionnaire and sharing it with your sample. Another primary method might be an interview with a group of people or a specialist within a certain field. Let's say you were interviewing a police officer or a doctor. That would be regarded as primary research, as long as it is based on what your question is focusing on. Your secondary research then is research that's been conducted by someone else. So when we're looking on the internet and we're looking at reports or articles or anything that's been remotely researched or commented on or published, that is secondary research because it's been done by someone else. You need to be talking about what strategies you're going to use for both in this. Many people structure it as one paragraph for primary, one paragraph for secondary, but that will become clear later on in this video when we show you an example. The third point on here is to explain why the research methods you've picked for your primary and secondary are suitable and appropriate. So you're justifying your choices of primary research and secondary research. Again, this will become more clear the further into this video. And the final one, explain what will be done with the research. So when we are researching, whether it's primary research that we're doing or secondary using other people's research, we are collecting data and information. Now, simply put, data is basically numbers. Okay, numbers, graphs, statistics, tables, things that can't be argued with. Information is more general opinions, or it could be articles. It's more words. So that's the best way to describe the difference between data and information. Some of your research might be using information, so that could be an article, an interview with someone, or it could be data, which is a researched a program that has gone on or a research project on a certain aspect. So that would conclude the success criteria for the research methods. Now, word count guidance, remember that this guidance, obviously the quality needs to match up with the word count that you are targeting, but for an A star or an A, you're looking for 200 to 300 words approximately. For a B, 150 words to 200 words approximately. We would suggest that you stay towards the top of that word count rather than to the bottom of that word count. For C grade, I'd say the same here. Stay towards the top of the word count rather than at the bottom of the word count for a C. And then a pass, we're looking for an absolute minimum of 60 words approximately. Now, what you need to answer, I've split this into primary research first, and then we'll be looking at secondary research. So what do you need to answer for the primary research part? We're looking at the first point on the screen. You are going to be answering what type of research or primary research are you going to do In this regard, for your individual project, we suggest you do a questionnaire, and also then how you will be sharing it with your sample. How many people will be in your sample? So a minimum amount of people that can take part in your questionnaire is 25. There's no maximum, but obviously the more people that you ask, the more data and information you're going to have to handle. So you don't necessarily want hundreds of people taking your questionnaire, but you certainly can have more than 25. Also then you need to identify who will be included in your research. So whether you decide on a certain age group, whether you decide on a gender, whether you decide on any other kind of dividing factors. You know, if you want to narrow down your search to year groups, so you just want year 7s, year 8s, year 9s, you just want teachers, there's so many different areas that you could focus your research on, or different sample groups. Third point then is how many and what type of questions in your questionnaire are you going to ask? So in this part you need to be thinking about what you want to find out. The type of questions that you'll ask, we suggest that we go for opinion scaled questions. Now, opinion scale questions are quite simply multiple choice, and they give an opinion, okay, or an option for your sample to choose. So you might make a statement such as the current offside rule in football is good for the game, you know, a statement like that, and you give them the option then of strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. You can place a neutral right in the middle there for those people who are unsure, and what that does, it gives you, accurate data to kind of convert into graphs if need be, and you've got percentages you can work with. So asking opinion-based questions really help. That's what we call a closed question, where we're not looking for extended answers. You can ask open questions where you're looking more for opinions. The only challenge with that is that it's more difficult to handle and present in a graph. The third point then, what will be done with the information and data collected with the questionnaire? So as I just mentioned about producing graphs, analysing the findings, that's essentially what that part is focusing on. And then finally, what other primary research methods could you consider? So what we tend to advise is that you might consider interviewing someone who has got knowledge of your question or is related to that field. But that's not required by everyone for the research methods. It's just a suggestion. So we've just gone through the primary, and now we're just going to go through the secondary, what to answer. So it does show some similarities with the primary with a few differences. So where are you going to locate most of your secondary research? Now these days it's definitely the internet is where most secondary research is located for students at Gcse. The second one then is what kind of secondary sources, websites will you focus your research? So you're now identifying where you think you're going to find your information. So you might be talking about websites such as the BBC or government websites, or avoiding possible .coms, because .coms are commercial websites and are often operating for profit, which sometimes calls into question the content that is on that website. You might want to work with .org websites because they are non-profit organisations. There's all of these kind of things you need to consider. When you're looking at sources, you might want to focus on reports or journals or articles, or it could be videos. Those are different types of secondary sources that you can use. The next one, how will you ensure that these secondary sources / websites are reliable? That will be explained later on in this video, but essentially how are you going to ensure that the information is true and trustworthy? Next point then, what will be done with the information and data collected? Very similar to the primary. You will analyse that data and you will link it to your question and your information. information and data, linking it to your question, answering your question. And then finally, what other secondary sources will you use? So generally we try to suggest streaming sites, so such as YouTube, Netflix, Prime Video. There's lots of documentaries around these days, so people tend to use those. It could be that you use your local library or the school library and other sources like that. So we need to look at some examples now. So if we are focusing on primary research methods at this point, we've got a sentence starter there that can help you. So the first one is, what type of primary research are you going to do? We know it's a questionnaire. And how will you share it? So for my primary research, I intend to produce a questionnaire by using, and then you fill in what you need to do there. We do teach students how to use Google Forms, okay? So we'll go through that in another video, but we will be talking about it later in this video as well. So that's a sentence starter that we start with. How many people it will be in your sample, and who will be included in your research. So the sample number that will take part in my questionnaire will be, so you're stating the number and you're stating the group that you want to take your questionnaire. The third part then, how many and what type of questions will you ask? For my questionnaire, I intend to create, we advise 5 to 10 questions. Certainly those people targeting the higher grades, B's, A's and A stars, you need to be hitting that 10 question mark. Okay. We spoke about the types of questions, those opinion-based questions that I just mentioned, giving a statement and then giving them the options of strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, with the option of neutral possibly in the middle to allow everyone to answer your questionnaire. The fourth part then, what will be done with the information and data collected from the questionnaire? The sentence starter you could use, with the information and data I collect from my questionnaire, I plan to, and you just state what you're going to do with it. So we know that we're going to analyze the data. We're going to use the information to answer the question. So with your questionnaire data, you're going to present them in graphs and you're going to analyze your findings, look for connections, look for trends. What did people tend to say to certain questions? You're going to look at whether it shocked you, some of the outcomes, or whether you expected some of the outcomes. Essentially, engage with the data that's in front of you. Engage with those graphs. Finally then, what other primary research methods? So quite simply, other primary research I will consider include, and that could be an interview, it could be a focus group. But that, as I said, that's not essential for the research methods. What we've got here is a full example from a previous year group, a student in a previous year group. So what we got here, for my primary research, I'm reading from the far left. For my primary research, I intend to produce a questionnaire by using Google Forms, sharing it electronically via email and social media. That is a clear sentence explaining what you're going to be doing and how you're going to share it. Okay. The second one then, the sample number that will take part in my questionnaire will be 25, male and female, and age between 15 to 25. As I said, everyone's is going to be slightly different there because not everyone is looking at the same type of question. The third one then, for my questionnaire, I intend to create 10 questions. I will ask opinion scale questions, and there's the examples there in front of you. With the information and data I collect from my questionnaire, I plan to analyze them in detail and present the results in numerical graphs. Okay, so lots of people tend to use pie charts to display and present the outcomes of their questionnaire questions. Other primary research I will consider include conducting an interview with a group of teenagers to get more personal feedback on my question focus. That there is a full example of what research methods would look like for the primary element. Okay, and there are the different questions that we stated at the start. Now, time to look at the secondary research methods. and we've got the sentence starters there. I'll put them all up first. So reading from the left, where are you going to locate most of your secondary research? For my secondary research, I intend to use the internet as a main source of information and data. It's not really a sentence starter, it's just a sentence to get you going. The second one then, what kind of secondary sources website will you be focusing on or using for your research? I will focus my research on information and data on sources such as, and then that's when you bring in whether you're going to use certain websites, whether you're going to use certain articles, whether you're going to use journals, etc., reports. The third one then, how will you ensure that these sources are reliable? So I will ensure that these websites are reliable by, and then we do almost like a source analysis. In the example, which I'll show in the next slide, we'll be able to explain to you a little bit more about what you need to do there. The fourth one then, what will be done with the information and data collected? Sentence starter, with the information and data I collect from my research, I intend to, and again, it's the same as the primary, you're going to use the information to understand more about your question and draw conclusions and answer your question. Finally then, what other secondary sources will you use? And I mentioned about streaming services, which the sentence starter there is very basic. Other secondary sources I will consider using, and then you add. But the next slide will inform you on how to structure that part. So here we are then with a full example for secondary sources. So that was that first sentence that we gave you. For my secondary research, I intend to use the internet as main source of information and data. The second one then, I will focus my research for information and data on sources such as journals, reports and articles. I will also look to use websites such as the BBC. So that's stating the types of sources you're going to use and the types of websites. Obviously you can go into a lot more detail at this point, but I'm just giving you an example there of what you might do, or this student has anyway. I will ensure that these websites are reliable by checking that they are up to date. So if we're talking about source analysis, things need to be up to date. If you are working with a report that's 20 years old, obviously there's going to be some inaccuracies, there's going to be changes. So when you're working with certain publications, date is an important part. Also, who has actually published the research. If you're learning about, let's say, plastic pollution, and you're reading a personal blog from an individual, that author is not necessarily reliable, okay, or trustworthy. So you need to consider that. So when you are using websites such as the BBC and they publish something on plastic pollution, that's going to be more reliable because they are qualified to comment. They are a news distributing platform. Just reading on from that, I will also look at the author to ensure that they are qualified to publish. I will also look at the quality of the website design and content. That is another way of checking your sources. Obviously, if there's spelling mistakes on the website, or the website looks particularly outdated, or it hasn't been updated lately, that calls into question the integrity of the website. So it's a superficial judgment, but it's a relevant one. Okay, the fourth one then, with the information and data I collect, I intend to extract relevant research and analyse in detail, addressing my question focus. That's quite an obvious one because it's just saying what you're going to do with all of that information. You are finding information to answer that question that you've stated at the start. Finally then, we spoke about other secondary sources, and we mentioned about streaming services such as Netflix, YouTube and Amazon Prime. So just state that you might use documentaries or programs relating to your question focus. Now, I think it's useful to see how it would look on the page, but you can see there how your research methods could look. And we've just used the two examples there of the primary research and secondary research. Notice how they are separated. They're not integrated into one part, and they focus on their specific areas. So first paragraph primary, second paragraph secondary. Hope this has been useful. Thanks for watching.